My name is Ani, and if you are listening to this, maybe somewhere, in some corner of your heart, you have felt the same kind of pain I carry inside me. Maybe you have cried at night when no one could see you. Maybe you have smiled in the morning pretending everything was fine, when inside, it was breaking. I was 19 when I first met Aaron. He was charming, the kind of man every girl dreams about. Tall, with eyes that looked like they carried 1,000 secrets. A smile that made you forget your own name. I was young, innocent, and so ready to believe in love. The first time he spoke to me, my heart forgot how to beat. He asked me about the book I was reading. I remember it so clearly. A book about dreams, about finding your forever person. I thought maybe, just maybe, he was my forever person. For months we talked every day, long phone calls at night, flowers on my birthday, promises whispered under the stars. He told me I was special, that he had never met anyone like me. And I believed him, because I wanted to. Because the girl I was back then thought love was everything. I remember the day he asked me to marry him. It was raining. We were standing under a small shelter near the park, the world wet and shining around us. He held my hands, looked into my eyes, and said, "Ani, will you be mine? Forever?" And I said yes. I didn't see the storm coming. The first few months of marriage were beautiful. I thought I was living in a dream. He held my hand in public, kissed my forehead when I was tired, brought me coffee in the mornings. We talked about children, about traveling the world, about growing old together. But slowly, things began to change. The man who once called me his everything began coming home late. The smile I fell in love with disappeared. He became quiet, distant, and then angry. The first time he shouted at me, I told myself it was stress. Everyone gets angry, right? The second time, when he threw the glass across the room, I told myself maybe it was my fault. Maybe I said something wrong. And then came the night when his anger turned into something worse. He had been drinking. I could smell it on his breath as soon as he walked in. I asked him if everything was okay. Just a simple question. And in a moment, his hand slammed against the table so hard the whole room shook. "Why do you keep questioning me, Ani?" he shouted. I froze. I had never seen him like this. My heart was beating so loudly I could hear it in my ears. That night, I cried myself to sleep. Days turned into weeks. Weeks into months, his anger became a guest that never left our house. Some days he wouldn't speak to me at all. Some days he would break things. Some days he broke me. I stopped recognizing myself in the mirror. The girl who once laughed easily, who dreamed about love and happiness. She was gone. In her place was someone who learned to walk on eggshells, someone who kept silent to survive. I remember calling my mother once, late at night. My hands were shaking. I wanted to tell her everything, but when she answered, I just said, "I'm fine, Mama." Because how do you tell the woman who raised you that her little girl is living in a nightmare? People think the hardest part is the bruises, the shouting, the fear. But no, the hardest part is pretending in front of the world that everything is okay. Smiling at neighbors, posting happy pictures on anniversaries, lying to friends when they ask if you're happy. Because somewhere inside you, a voice whispers, maybe it's your fault. Maybe you deserve this. Maybe if you try harder, he will love you again. And so you stay. I stayed. For 3 years, I stayed. One winter night, it snowed heavily. I was standing by the window, watching the streetlights glow against the white world outside. Aaron came home late again. He was angry again. But that night, something inside me broke completely. He shouted for almost an hour. About what? I don't even remember. At some point, his words became noise. And I felt nothing. No fear. No tears. Nothing. Just empty. When he finally left the room, I packed a small bag. My hands weren't even shaking this time. I wore my coat, opened the door, and stepped out into the snow. For the first time in years, I could breathe. I walked to my mother's house. She opened the door, saw my face, and without a single question, just held me. I cried like a child in her arms. All the tears I had swallowed for years came out that night. And in that moment, I knew I wasn't going back. When I woke up the next morning at my mother's house, I felt like I had been living someone else's life for years. And now suddenly I was back in my own skin. My mother made me breakfast like she used to when I was a teenager. She didn't ask too many questions. Maybe she could see the answers written on my face. For the first time in 3 years, I ate without fear. No loud voice telling me I was too slow. No angry footsteps coming from the hallway. Just quiet. But along with the quiet came a strange emptiness. When you leave someone who has broken you for years, you think you will feel free. And yes, there is freedom. But there is also this heavy, crushing weight of memories, of all the words he said to you, all the nights you cried, all the dreams you buried. I couldn't just erase it. I remember sitting by the window that day, watching kids play in the snow and wondering, who am I now? What do I do with all this pain? The next few weeks were hard. Aaron called many times. At first, his voice was angry. You think you can just leave? Ani, come back home. Then it became soft. I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. You know I love you. But love doesn't look like fear. Love doesn't sound like breaking glass and shouting at midnight. Love doesn't feel like walking on eggshells every single day, so I didn't go back. Every time the phone rang, my hands shook. Every time I saw his name on the screen, I felt like I couldn't breathe. But I stayed strong. One evening, I went for a walk alone. The sky was turning pink, the kind of evening that makes you feel small and hopeful at the same time. I passed by a bookstore, the same one where I first met Aaron years ago. For a moment, I couldn't move. Memories hit me like a wave. That was where he first smiled at me, where he first made me feel like I was the only girl in the world. I stood there for a long time, and then I walked in. Not because of him, because books had always been my safe place, even before him. I picked up a small journal that day. On the first page, I wrote, "This is where I start again." Writing became my therapy. Every night, after everyone slept, I opened that journal and poured my heart out. The pain, the memories, the anger, the confusion. Everything went into those pages. Some nights I cried so hard I couldn't even see the words through my tears. But slowly, the pain started to feel lighter. One day, while sitting in a cafe with my journal, I met someone. His name was Daniel. No, this isn't one of those stories where another man magically fixes everything. Daniel didn't come into my life as a hero. He came in as a friend, a stranger who saw me crying quietly over my coffee and asked if I was okay. I almost said I'm fine, out of habit. But something about his voice, gentle, patient, made me tell the truth for the first time in years. "I'm not okay," I whispered. And he just nodded. Didn't push for details, didn't ask questions, just sat there so I wouldn't feel alone. Days turned into weeks again. I started seeing the world differently. I laughed for the first time in years. A small, awkward laugh that felt strange in my own throat. Daniel became a friend I could talk to. Someone who didn't judge. Someone who listened. My mother noticed the change in me. "You smile more these days," she said one evening. I touched my face without realizing it. She was right. I was smiling. But healing is not a straight road. Some nights I still woke up shaking from nightmares. Some days I saw couples holding hands and felt a deep ache in my chest. Trust is not something that comes back overnight. Once, Aaron showed up at my mother's house. He stood at the door, looking tired, desperate. "Annie, please, just talk to me," he said. My heart pounded in my chest. For a second, I saw the man I first fell in love with, the one who brought me flowers and whispered promises under the stars. But then I remembered the shouting, the fear, the nights I cried myself to sleep. And I said quietly but firmly, "No, not anymore." I closed the door. My hands were shaking, but my heart felt lighter than it had in years. That night, I wrote in my journal, "Sometimes walking away is the bravest thing you can do, and sometimes it's the only way to survive." When I closed the door on Aaron that evening, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I leaned against the wall, my breath coming out in small, broken pieces. But deep inside, there was this tiny flame, a small, brave flame that whispered, "You did it. You chose yourself." I had spent years choosing him, his moods, his temper, his silence. I had bent myself into shapes just to keep the peace. But now, for the first time, I was choosing me. The next morning, I woke up early. The sun was barely rising, painting the sky in soft gold. I sat at the window with my journal, the one that had become my secret companion. On a new page, I wrote, "Today I begin again." Not as a wife, not as someone's shadow, just as Ani. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a little free. Life didn't change overnight. Healing never does. There were days when memories came rushing back like storms. Nights of shouting, the sound of breaking glass, the fear that crawled under my skin. But there were also small, beautiful moments. My mother's gentle smile when she saw me eating properly again. The way Daniel would sit across from me at the cafe, reading his own book while I wrote in my journal. The laughter of children playing outside my window, reminding me that life goes on, even after the darkest nights. One rainy afternoon, Daniel asked me something. "Ani," he said softly, "what do you want to do now? With your life, I mean." I stared at him. No one had asked me that in years. Not Aaron. Not anyone. What did I want? I thought about it that whole night, and slowly, an old dream came back to me. I used to love writing stories. Before marriage, before everything, I wanted to write a book someday. But Aaron always laughed at the idea. "Who's going to read your stories?" he would say. I closed that dream inside me like a locked box. But now, maybe I could open it again. So I started writing, not just in my journal, but real stories. About pain, about courage, about women like me who had forgotten their own names in someone else's shadow. Some nights, the words came slowly like shy children. Other nights, they poured out like rain. Daniel read one of my stories one day. He looked at me with a kind of respect I hadn't seen in anyone's eyes for a long time. "Ani," he said, This is beautiful. You should share it with the world." His words planted a seed of hope in me. Months passed. I sent one of my stories to a small online magazine. My hands trembled when I clicked send. I didn't expect anything. But 2 weeks later, they replied. They wanted to publish it. I cried when I read that email. Not because of the magazine, not because of the story, but because for the first time in so many years, someone saw me, not as a wife, not as someone's mistake, just as Annie, a woman with a voice. When my first story went online, I read every comment, every message from women who said, "I felt this. I lived this. Thank you for writing this." I realized something that day. All those years of pain, they hadn't been for nothing. Because now maybe my words could help someone else find their courage too. One evening, Daniel and I walked by the same bookstore where I had bought my journal months ago. "Funny," I said softly. "This place was the beginning of everything." Daniel smiled. "Sometimes the hardest endings lead to the best beginnings." I didn't know what the future held. Maybe I'd write more stories. Maybe I'd travel. Maybe I'd fall in love again someday. Or maybe I wouldn't. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid of the unknown, because I had survived the worst, and I was still here. That night in my journal, I wrote one last line before closing it. My story isn't over. It's just beginning. Life has a strange way of teaching you. It doesn't give you answers right away. It breaks you first, and then, slowly, it helps you find the pieces of yourself you thought you had lost forever. For months after Aaron left my life, I lived in a strange silence. Sometimes it was peaceful. Other times it felt heavy, like a weight pressing on my chest. But in that silence, I learned something important. I learned to hear my own voice again. I remember one evening, the sky was painted with orange and pink, and I was sitting on my balcony with a cup of tea. My notebook was open on my lap. And suddenly I smiled. Not because of anything big, not because life had become perfect, but because the wind touched my face gently, like it was reminding me, "You're alive, you're free." It was such a simple thing, but after years of fear, even small freedoms feel like miracles. I began writing more seriously. Every day I gave myself at least 1 hour. Just me, my thoughts, and my words. The pain that had once felt like a prison slowly turned into stories, poems, and letters to the girl I used to be. One of my poems began with the line, "She was a bird with broken wings, but even broken wings can learn to fly again." When I posted it online, it reached hundreds of people. Women, men, even teenagers wrote to me saying, "This is my story too." And I realized, we are all carrying silent battles. Some of us just need someone to put them into words. Then one day, Daniel came to see me with a big smile on his face. "Annie," he said, handing me his phone. "Look at this." It was a message from a small publisher. They had read my stories online. They wanted me to write a book. A book. For a moment, I just stared at the screen, my heart pounding. Me? The girl who once wasn't even allowed to buy her own clothes without permission? The girl who had been told she was too small to dream? Now someone wanted my words to become a book? I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Writing that book became my new journey. It wasn't easy. Some days, old memories made my hands shake on the keyboard. Some nights, I cried because the pain still lived inside me like an old wound. But I wrote anyway, because I had promised myself my pain would not end with me. It would become something bigger. Something that might help another girl somewhere feel less alone. Months later, when my first book was finally printed, I held it in my hands like it was a newborn child. The title on the cover read, "Silent Tears, The Story of Finding Myself." And underneath, in small letters, by Ani Rivera. That was me. My name. My story. Not his. Not ours. Just mine. The book launch was small. A cafe, a few readers, Daniel, my mother, and some friends I had made through my writing. When I stood there reading a passage from my book, my voice trembled at first, but then I looked at the faces in front of me. People listening, some even wiping their eyes. And I felt something break open inside me. I wasn't afraid anymore. After the reading, a young girl came to me. She must have been 17 or 18. She said in a small voice, "Ma'am, your story? It felt like you were telling my story. I live in a house like the one you wrote about. I'm scared every day. But today, I feel a little braver." I hugged her. I didn't have the right words, but in my heart I knew this was why I survived. So that maybe someone else wouldn't feel so alone. As months turned into a year, my book reached more people. Some called it healing. Some said it gave them courage to leave toxic homes, to speak up, to dream again. And every time someone wrote to me, I sent a silent prayer into the universe. A prayer for all the women like me, waiting for a chance to be free. One night, I was sitting by my window again, the city lights glowing below. And I realized something. I wasn't the same Ani anymore. I was not just a girl with scars. I was a woman with wings. And maybe, just maybe, my story had only just begun. Life after the book launch felt different. Not because everything was suddenly perfect. No, life never works like that. But because for the first time in years, I felt like I was steering the ship. Not the storm, not Aaron, not fear, just me. One evening, a well-known women's organization invited me to speak at their annual event. At first, I said no. Public speaking? Me? The girl who once couldn't even look people in the eye without shaking? But Daniel said, "Ani, your story can change lives. Say yes." So I did. The day of the event, I stood backstage, my palms sweating, my heart racing. There were hundreds of people in the audience. Students, teachers, activists, journalists. I wanted to run away. But then I remembered that girl from the cafe. The one who said my story made her feel braver. I took a deep breath and walked onto the stage. The lights were so bright, I couldn't even see the audience clearly. My voice trembled at first as I said, "My name is Ani Rivera, and for many years I thought my life belonged to someone else." Silence. I continued. "I thought my dreams belonged to my husband. My happiness belonged to him. Even my freedom." My voice grew stronger. But today, I stand here as someone who learned that no one has the right to control your wings." As I spoke, I saw heads nodding. Some people wiped their eyes. I told them about the fear, the nights I cried alone, the moment I finally walked away, the book that was born from my pain. And then I said the words I never thought I'd be brave enough to say in public. Leaving was the hardest thing I ever did. But staying would have killed me inside. After the speech, people came up to me, hugging me, thanking me. Some whispered, "This is my story too." And that night, as I lay in bed, I realized maybe my pain had a purpose after all. Maybe this was what healing looked like. Turning wounds into something that could light someone else's path. Months passed. I started working with organizations that supported women in abusive homes. Sometimes I sat with them in tiny offices, listening to their stories over cups of tea. Sometimes I cried with them. But every time I told them, "You are not alone, and you are stronger than you think." One afternoon, I received a letter. It was from a woman named Clara. She wrote, "Ani, I read your book. I left my abusive marriage last month. I'm scared, but for the first time in years, I feel free. Thank you for giving me the courage to save myself." I held that letter against my chest and cried, because that was it. That was the reason for everything. Years later, my book became part of a university course on women's rights and healing through storytelling. Students wrote essays about it. Some even reached out to interview me for their research. And every time I sat with them, I thought about the girl I used to be. The girl who once believed she was nothing. Now her story was teaching the world something about courage. One evening, Daniel said to me with a smile, "Ani, do you realize? You are not just surviving anymore. You are living." And he was right. I was traveling to new cities for talks, writing more books, meeting people who carried their own stories of pain and survival. Life wasn't perfect. It never is. But it was mine. And one day, a journalist asked me, "Ani, if you could go back and change your past, would you?" I thought about it for a long moment, and then I said softly, "No, because without that storm, I would never have found my wings." That night, as I looked out at the city lights, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the kind that comes from life being easy, but the kind that comes from knowing you survived, and you turned your pain into something beautiful. Years had passed. When I looked back now, it felt like I was watching someone else's life. That broken, scared girl who once cried herself to sleep every night. But no, that was me. And maybe that was the most powerful part of all this. Realizing how far I had come. One sunny morning, I received an invitation. It was for an international conference on women, freedom, and healing through stories. They wanted me as a keynote speaker. Me, Ani Rivera. The girl who once had no voice was now being asked to speak to the world. I flew to London for the event. Standing there in front of thousands of people from different countries, I felt my hands tremble again. But this time, it wasn't fear. It was gratitude. I began softly. There was a time when I believed my story was nothing but pain. But today I stand here to tell you, your voice, your story, your truth can move mountains. The hall was silent. People listened. Some leaned forward, their eyes shining. I shared my journey. The darkness, the escape, the healing, the book, the women who found courage through my words. And then I said, we cannot always control the storms life throws at us, but we can choose not to let the storm break us. After the conference, a young girl, maybe 19, came to me crying. She whispered, I thought I was alone, but after hearing you, I feel like I can survive this. I hugged her tightly and told her, you are stronger than you think, sweetheart. Don't let anyone steal your light. When I returned home, life slowly found its rhythm again. I wrote 2 more books, one about healing, one about rebuilding life after pain. They reached people I would never meet, but somehow our hearts connected through words. One evening, Daniel proposed to me. Yes, the man who once believed in me when I didn't even believe in myself. But I surprised him and myself when I said, not yet. Because I realized something important. I didn't want to rush into a new chapter before fully honoring the one I had just closed. For the first time in my life, I wanted to choose me first. And so, I traveled. I visited places I had only dreamed of. Paris, Rome, little villages in Spain where sunsets painted the sky gold. I sat in cafes with strangers who became friends. I laughed. I cried. I wrote. I lived. One night in Greece, sitting by the sea, I finally wrote the last line of my 3rd book. It said, this story is not about pain. It is about the woman who walked through fire and came out carrying light. And when I wrote that, I knew I was free. Years later, when people introduced me at events, they called me author, speaker, survivor, inspiration. But deep inside, I was still just Ani, the girl who once thought her life was over, only to find out it was just beginning. And if you ask me now what I've learned after all these years, I would tell you this. No matter how dark it gets, no matter how broken you feel, there is always a tomorrow waiting for you. You just have to be brave enough to walk toward it. Because storms end, hearts heal, and even the deepest wounds can grow flowers one day.